Welcome to the Circuit of Success Podcast.
The Circuit of Success Podcast.
With your host,
Brett
Gilliland.
Brett Gilliland, Visionary Wealth Advisory.
The Circuit of Success Podcast. Let's start the show.
Welcome to the Circuit of Success. I'm your host, Brett Gilliland, and today I've got Jason Hreha with me. Jason, how you doing, my man?
Good. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. So you live in Nashville, but are in New York today, traveling. And how's everything going in New York right now?
New York's one of the best cities in the world, so I can't complain. Yeah, I love it here.
Yeah.
Love the energy.
Keeps you busy, and Nashville's awesome. I love going to Nashville. My wife and I try to make it there at least once a year.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think Nashville's become my favorite city in the world. I think just the quality of life, you can't beat it. The people are great. The food's great. The weather's, in general, great.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, you are a behavioral scientist, a former Stanford researcher, an innovator, a founder, and an author. You own a company called Persona. And then your book, Real Change, Moving Beyond Habits to Achieve Lasting Transformation is out. And so excited to talk about that. But like I do on every podcast here, Jason, before we get started, I'd like to help set the tone here. What's helped make you the man that you are today?
Wow, that's a great question. So I have an interesting point of view, I think, just based on my background around what creates us. So, one of my areas of expertise is personality psychology, and so I'm very interested in that. I studied neuroscience in college, so I was very interested in the development of the brain. How do we get wired up? What creates us? And I do think that a lot of what people tend to talk about in the self-help space or like in the popular psychology space is like the nurture side of things. So, a lot of it's like, well, what experiences happened to you growing up? What things did you learn? What were these informative experiences? But I think equally as important, right? 50-50, nature and nurture, equally as important is just kind of who you are, right? I think we're all kind of dealt a deck of cards. We all are kind of given a certain set of predispositions, traits, personality, aptitudes. And so I think a lot of what has made me who I am is just kind of fate or luck or randomness. Where I was just born with a certain unique personality. And I think a lot of life is just figuring out your niche or just trying to figure out, where do I fit in? What's the best place for me? What should I study? Who should I hang out with, et cetera?
Yeah. It's funny. My dad always told me the books you read and the people you surround yourself with can make you a better person. I just studied, didn't like my friends, right? So it always made me mad. But he's right. He's dang, he's right. Like most parents are. But let's talk about that. When did you know you wanted to study the brain? Because I don't think a lot of kids grow up and say, "Oh, I want to study the brain one day." So what was that for you, and what was kind of the catalyst for that?
It was a weird experience actually. So I was the high school I went to, you could pick your English class. And I remember that they had a few different options. And my junior year, there was a class on ancient Eastern thought that you could take as your English class. And so you'd read like the Dhammapada, and you'd read like kind of other kind of ancient, usually like Eastern religious books. And I remember when I was reading those books, at the time, National Geographic published an issue on monks that were being studied at the University of Wisconsin by this guy, Richard Davidson, who was doing all these different brain scans on monks. And he was looking at how are their brains different? Are they structured any differently? And he noticed that there are differences in like prefrontal cortical activity, I think prefrontal cortical thickness as well, if I remember correctly. And I remember that was just a mind-blowing experience for me. It had been the first time in my life I ever thought, wow, you could actually like study this black box inside of your head. I'd never really up until that point thought about my brain or really thought about kind of what was biologically happening to just kind of build my personality, my worldview, my experience. And so at that point I thought, man, this is extremely interesting. I picked up as many books as I could, and I decided really then that I was going to study this academically in college.
Yeah. And let's talk about habits. People, you talk about what is Atomic Habits, the book, and different things like that, and stacking habits. What for you have you found with all the studying, all the work that you've done has been the most critically important thing for people to do to one, create a habit, but then stick to the habit?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's a lot of, I think the one of the areas in kind of the popular psychology world that has the most misunderstandings behind it is actually the habit realm. Habits are important, but I think they're overrated in the sense of almost everything that people want to do in terms of a habit is let me just rewind a little bit. So a lot of people say, hey, I want to create an exercise habit, or I want to create a, like start a new diet and like start habitually eating differently. Most of these things are not actually possible from a habit point of view, from a scientific perspective. When we study habits in the academic world, habits are very small, tiny, subconscious or unconscious behaviors that occur within a predictable environment. So for example, when you wake up in the morning and your arm just shoots over to the side of your bed without you thinking about it and you grab your phone to look at the time, that's a habit. Entering a room and flicking a light switch, that's a habit. Once you get much more complex than that, the habit mechanism isn't really working anymore. You're really dealing with like conscious, willful, deliberate behavior. So for example, exercise, it's so uncomfortable. Our bodies dislike it so much. And the whole point of exercise is to push yourself to the edge of your limits so that you actually kind of, tear muscle tissue or kind of stress your cardiovascular system, and so that you get better. It requires a lot of willpower, effort. It requires you to push through the 10 or 20 or 30 times that you want to stop. That by definition is like a very conscious behavior. It's not really in any way, shape, or form a habit. And so I think that one of the big problems and the reason that people keep buying habit books over and over again and that people keep publishing them is because there's this bait and switch that's occurring. I think so. There's a popular, like casual definition of habit that we all use when we talk to our friends. If you say, hey, I want to get in the exercise habit. What you mean by that is, I just want to do this thing fairly regularly. But when you say the word habit to somebody in the behavioral sciences, it means something very different. It's a much smaller, tinier, little thing. And all the research around habits really refers to these very small, tiny, subconscious/unconscious behaviors that occur automatically. And so I think that the big problem, what's happened is that people in the self-help and popular psychology world, they go and they read the habit literature that's using the word habit that refers to a very different type of behavior. And then they're generalizing those tactics or those research findings to very complicated, hard, effortful behaviors. And I think it's no surprise that none of those tactics really work all that well.
Right. It's like I always look at, from my office back here, I can see one of the big chain fitness places. January, place is packed, right? And then by February 2nd, the place is empty. And I think, would you call it conscious choice? Is that what you said, versus it being a habit, the exercise thing?
Yeah, I would say that exercise would be like a goal-driven, willful, effortful behavior, right? You can call it whatever you want, but the whole point is that it's not something that you're just doing on autopilot without thinking automatically. It's something that you have to consciously choose to do, and you have to consciously choose to keep doing it because it's hard and it's not very fun.
Yeah, that's right. So I know you're the global head for behavioral science at Walmart. So talk to us about that. Like, what did you learn, kind of climbing the ranks there, working with that many people, that much data? What was the biggest takeaways there?
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's a good question. So I was there for around 3 years. They recruited me to help build out their applied behavioral science group. It was the first Fortune 100 applied behavioral science group that existed, which was really cool. So what we got to do is we got to help the executive team and just different teams across the company accomplish behavior change tasks, right? Like, strategic behavior change tasks. I can't go into extreme detail on everything because a lot of it is confidential or private, but just to give you some examples of things I worked on. So Walmart owns Sam's Club, and one of their big projects was actually building out a new store format. It's called Sam's Club Now. The first one was in the Dallas area, and it was an associate-free, an employee-free kind of store where you'd have people stocking the shelves, et cetera, but you had no checkout. And it was more or less like a self-serve type of store. And so our group did a lot of work on that in order to help figure out how to make the user experience as good as possible and to get people comfortable with this sort of new retail experience. We did a lot of work with Sam's Club in general, actually. We did a big project on new member initiation. So somebody signs up for Sam's Club. A lot of people, though, don't really understand how to use these kind of discount membership programs or stores, right? Like, you sign up, how do you know what exactly you can do there, right? There are so many different options, right? You have like a bakery at Sam's Club. You have, at the time, you had like a photographic printing, you have a pharmacy, you have all these other things like that. And of course, the more services that we can get you to take advantage of or to use, the more likely you're going to get value and the more likely you're going to stay. So how do you kind of help people build a mental model of that and kind of really understand the store and then kind of build routines around these different activities. And so I did a lot of work around kind of onboarding new members there, and getting people to use the app that we have called Scan and Go at Sam's Club. It's an app so that instead of you going through checkout, you can actually scan yourself and check yourself out. And so I did a lot of different projects there. But what were the big things that I really learned there? I would say that I wouldn't say there were too many surprises, to be totally honest, just because, right, when you're dealing with, Walmart globally has over 1 billion customers each year. And when you're dealing with more or less like not the entire global population, but a huge portion of it, you kind of you're getting a wonderful sample of just humanity in general, of people in general. And kind of the things that you learn about, the general principles and the things that you learn about in class or in books tend to be true when you're dealing with just like, a representative global sample of individuals. And so I wouldn't say that I learned any truly mind-blowing new things there. It was really just a matter of kind of being innovative, being creative, and just like helping the company solve really hard, challenging problems one after another at scale. Which presents its own problems. But it was great. It was a great experience.
So how do you help the local man or woman listen to this now that owns a business, doesn't have 1 billion people they're serving, right? Like how do you work together as a team, maybe to think strategically and to think differently and to think bigger and believe bigger? How would you recommend people do that?
Well, my advice always, when I started my applied behavioral science journey working with companies, so when I first started my career, I was working with technology companies, more or less as a consultant. So companies would have trouble getting people to use their app or to use their website or their new product. And they'd bring me in and they'd say, okay, what's going on here? Why aren't people using it every day, every week, every month? Like why are they not forming a habit around it? Why are they not really building a routine around our service? And in the early days, what I thought was, okay, I learned all these great tips, tricks, tools from my behavioral science background. Let me just give them a whole, host of 10 different tools that they could try and implement, or types of interventions they can implement. And that was my initial point of view, was just like, okay, just try these generic things, try these general tried and true principles from the behavioral sciences. But what I learned very quickly was that actually these kind of generic copy and paste approaches where you're just like, I read about, let's say the foot in the door tactic in a book, or I learned about, people are loss averse, you should use loss aversion framing or scarcity or social proof. These sorts of things, if you just apply them in a cookie cutter, not strategic way, they just don't really work that well. The effect sizes are really small. They're really not going to move the needle for you as a business. And so what I learned very quickly doing this work was every user group, every customer group, unless you're dealing with like the global customer, like at a company like Walmart, in that case, it's a little different. But if you don't run a business of that scale, really every user group and every customer group is going to be very unique and very different. They're going to have their own quirks. They're going to have their own preferences. They're going to have their own capabilities based on their socioeconomic status or where they live, their life situation. They're going to be motivated by different things. Like one thing we know from personality psychology is that the things that motivate people are very different. Right? Like highly extroverted people are going to be much more motivated by kind of achieving, getting rewards or engaging in social activities. People that are more introverted are much less sensitive to those sorts of things. People who are very low in agreeableness are very competitive, like beating other people or winning in games. People that are more high in agreeableness are much more team members. They like winning together or connecting with other people in that sort of way. And so I think that the key thing that I've really learned is, if you're trying to influence somebody, if you're trying to influence a group of people, the most important thing is understanding them and what makes them unique in every facet. So as I mentioned before, what are their motivations? What are their goals? What's their life situation like? What are they able to do and not do? What are they afraid of? Like, what are their big anxieties? And just kind of really understanding all of these sorts of things in a much more rich way first. And then based upon that, what I like to tell people to do is you should then, based upon your understanding of the group, pick the right activity or behavior for them, and then build your product or your service around that activity or behavior. So think behavior first, right? I think too many business owners, too many people, when they're trying to be innovative or strategic. They jump straight to the product or the service. But actually, I think starting a step earlier, thinking about the psychological and behavioral dynamics of the people that you're trying to influence, picking the right activity for them, and then making that activity as good as possible or as easy as possible with your product, service, technology is the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think you focus on the client too, right? I mean, that's at the end of the day, let's focus on that. It's the most important thing. Talk about some of your, if we don't want to call them habits, we want to call them conscious choices. What are some of the things, if I followed you around, every day, and which would be weird, but if I did, what are some of the choices I'd see you making day in and day out that have helped you get where you're at today?
That's a great question. So the dichotomy that I make in the book I call them transformative practices, but really you could just use the word practice. I like to create that dichotomy between habits and practices. And the reason I chose that word is because if you think about it, what's the purpose of, what is a practice? What's the purpose of it? It's to stretch yourself, to push yourself to get better. And I see that as kind of really what people are actually trying to do when they say they want to create a new habit around something. What they're really trying to do is, I think, create a new practice around something so they can improve in that area and get better. And so the whole approach that I put forward in the book and that I follow and that has caused me to choose the behaviors that I do is, I call it behavioral strategy. And the whole idea is, I think the main determinant of whether or not you do a behavior is whether or not the behavior is a good fit for you. I know that sounds kind of simple and silly, but the basic idea is, okay, let's say your goal is to lose weight, or let's say your goal is to make more money, right? Well, if your goal is to lose weight, there's 1,000 different ways you can lose weight, right? You can play tennis, you can go swimming, you can go on a paleo diet, you can go on a carnivore diet, you can go vegan, right? There's just so many different ways to achieve that goal. Some of those ways, some of those behaviors are going to be a good fit for you, and some of them are going to be a bad fit for you. But picking the right behavior is going to be the main thing that determines whether or not you keep doing that behavior. So if you pick a sport that you hate and that hurts your knees, because let's say you have an old knee injury, using all these habit hacks that you read in all these books around remind yourself, make it easier, this, that, none of those things are going to have any impact on you doing that activity if you pick the wrong activity. Maybe they'll have a very marginal, maybe you'll go once more over the course of the year or twice more, but it's not going to make a huge impact on your life. And so my whole point of view is pick the right behavior. So for me, my behaviors are very specific to me, right? I really, really I don't like running, but I do like doing high intensity interval training and doing more intense kind of sprint-like stuff. And so if you actually come to my house, what you'll see is I have a gym in my garage that I've created with this bike called a Carol bike that allows me to do high intensity interval training very quickly and easily, multiple times per week. I have an air bike that allows me to do kind of interval sprints multiple times per week right there as well. I oftentimes will get so busy with work and will just get so busy with life that I don't actually have time to go get in my steps or kind of get in my aerobic workout side of things. So I have a treadmill desk right there, right underneath my desk, so that as I'm working throughout the day, I can spend 2 or 3 hours of my workday walking and get 15,000, 20,000 steps while I'm doing my work. And so for me, I have all these kind of these practices built into my environment, but they're all things that are based on what I like, what fits my goals. And then I work to make them as situationally specific and easy for me as possible. And so I really think that the key to just winning from a self-improvement or a goal perspective is think about what you want, pick the right thing. And I have a whole process in the book to pick the right behaviors for you to accomplish your goals. And then just build them into your context, build them into your environment. And you're probably never going to do them mindlessly. When I do interval training, it's not mindless. It's brutal, and it kind of sucks. Yeah. But it's something that overall makes me feel good, that I like enough to do it regularly. I can't do a two-hour run or an hour-and-a-half run regularly. But instead of doing the 2-hour run or an hour-and-a-half run, I can walk at a good clip at my treadmill desk, get my heart rate up to actually a pretty good level and maintain that for 2-3 hours. So I think it's just all about picking the right things for you that fit uniquely you and your strengths, weaknesses, psychology, and all that.
Takes some talent to be walking and using a mouse and using a keyboard. And,
That's true. The first 2 or 3 times, it's not good. Yeah.
Equilibrium's all messed up. Like, what the hell's going on here?
Totally.
What do you think's the biggest risk that you took in your career that you're happy that you took, but doing it was scary, real scary?
I think probably the biggest one was, I had a great job at Walmart. Like, I absolutely loved it. Running that group there, it was fantastic. I loved it. It was interesting every day. The team, like, I cannot say enough good things about Walmart as a company. Like, the people that run the company they're just good people. They're really smart. They obsess over the customer and they love the customer. I mean, it's just such an incredible organization that I really, really liked being there and I didn't want to leave. But I would say that I got the idea for running the current company that I run called Persona while I was at Walmart. I just had this inkling or this idea that, this would be kind of an interesting thing to work on someday. And so at a certain point, I decided to leave and create this company. And I'd say that was the biggest risk I've ever taken. Yeah. But, it's turned into a large, successful organization, and it's been very interesting. So I have no regrets.
So talk more about that. Tell us more about Persona.
Yeah. So what we did was originally what the company did a long time ago is I was very interested in, as an applied behavioral scientist, in behavioral prediction. So, okay, I've focused most of my career on how do I get this individual or these individuals to change their behavior in this way. With Persona, I got very interested in, okay, if you have a group of individuals, could I actually accurately predict what they're going to do if I do nothing? So, like, instead of me trying to influence, I was just interested in, can I observe and predict? And so I was thinking about, okay, what would be the best context in which I could kind of learn about this or study this? And, like hiring is like one of the most classic examples of behavioral prediction. You have a group of people, you talk to them or you look at their resumes, and your job as the hirer, the person hiring, is to predict out of all these people, who would be the best fit, who would perform the best, and just be the best addition to the team. It's an extremely hard problem. And so when I was at Walmart, I did a ton of reading just in the evenings, just for fun on my free time, on this field called psychometrics, and then in this field called industrial organizational psychology. And I was very interested in, okay, what does the research have to say about the best methods for hiring somebody? So, like, what tools should you use? What methods should you use to hire people? And over again, what I saw was the best way to hire people is not through interviewing. It's actually through giving individuals assessments or tests, seeing how they kind of stack up, and then based upon their scores on these different tests, then hiring them. So basically creating tests that are specific to the role. So I got very interested in personality assessment. I got very interested in what's called cognitive ability assessment and other types of tests as well. And I'm just kind of figuring out, like, how could you actually construct tests, measure kind of people's strengths and weaknesses in different areas, and then use that in order to predict their job performance. And so the company originally started as a testing company. We were going to sell testing software, but we abandoned that pretty quickly. So we originally created that as testing software, but people didn't really understand they weren't really that into it. Like, we would say, you should use these tests in order to hire. But if you test somebody and they score really well, but then you interview them, most people are going to trust their interview and how they felt during the interview with the candidate over the test. And so it was hard for us to get adoption of that. And so we abandoned the whole testing angle. And what we decided was, we said, let's create some of our own tests, but then also just create our own kind of methods for assessing and selecting individuals, that being very as data-driven and as scientific as possible, and then build like a remote talent company around that, where we'd get great remote talent for companies. And since I was in San Francisco and Silicon Valley for so long, really our focus was, let's specialize in non-technical remote talent for tech companies. So, right, like large and small tech companies, they don't just need engineers, they need, administrative staff, they need executive assistants, they need project managers, they need marketers, they need accountants, bookkeepers, customer service people, you name it.
Yep.
And so the whole idea was, let's just focus on using these like data-driven methods to find the very best non-technical people and send them to tech companies so that they can have great careers there.
Nice. And you've been doing that for how long?
I think it's been 6 years.
Okay.
Over 6 years. It's been a while.
And how many employees do you all have?
We have a lot. We're not public about the exact size of the company, but we are a large organization. Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
Talk to us about, and to our listeners about AI, the chat GPT, all that stuff. Obviously it's huge.
Yeah.
If you're not in that world, you may just know. I was at a meeting today and we were talking about it, and the three people in the room really had never even used it. Right. So talk to us about that. How do you think it's going to change the world, and what role should we be playing with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I use AI every day for probably hours a day. I mean, I'm always chatting with the different AI programs. I see the AIs. I treat them almost like an advisory council, and I always imagine in my head that I have a table in front of me, and I have Google Gemini's in seat number 1, then I have ChatGPT in seat number 2, Claude in the next seat, and then Perplexity or Grok or one of the other models in the other seat. And what I do with AI is whenever I have a challenge, I generally don't use it for simple questions, but in general for challenging questions or conundrums, or if I'm really trying to piece through something very logically or technically challenging where you just really need to use all your brain power, what I like to do is to come up with my solution and then present it to each of the 4 different AIs and get each of their takes on it, because each of them thinks a little bit differently, right? Gemini 2.5 Pro has its own strengths. ChatGPT o3, that model, has its own strengths. And so they all kind of think about these problems a little differently. And what I found is that if you just kind of treat them like colleagues and you're just having a meeting and you're sitting at a table and you're brainstorming back and forth, you can very quickly, with what could take a week or 2 weeks or a month with people, you can do with these models within sometimes an hour. Right. So it's absolutely insane. I think that these models tend to lack a bit of common sense, and they will sometimes produce give you suggestions where you're just like, as a human, you're just like, what? If I sent this email to somebody, they would just be totally weirded out. So I think that the AI it's a great augmenter of human capabilities, and if you use your own judgment, and if you're a curator and a filterer, you can expedite your progress and your work progress just so much. You can do in a month what would have taken in the past a year or potentially 2 years. So what do I think the future of AI is? I mean, I don't think anybody really knows, but I do think it's just I think it's going to be a huge force multiplier, mostly for high performers. Because this is something that I've noticed just with my friends and with some of my colleagues too, is that certain people really, the very best people, tend to really, the best people and the most creative, innovative, high-performing individuals seem to really take to it and use it to make themselves 5 or 10 times better than they already are. But a lot of people are just like, oh, I'm not interested, or they don't really use it that much, or they're not all that deliberate about trying to use it. And I think you're going to have this huge talent divide in the coming years, where okay, now you have one person who can do with a bunch of AI agents and AI models can do what 50 or 100 people used to do in the past. Yeah. But your average employee is maybe 1.2 times better than they were before, right? So I think you're going to have this very interesting thing play out. So I think it's fascinating. And I mean, in my industry, what we're doing at Persona is every single we hire non-technical talent, and we have an AI training program that everybody has to go to, and we're super intense about this is in the future. I do think most people you're going to be kind of a manager and a curator of AIs.
Yeah.
Where your job is, right? Your job is basically, okay, I have an idea and I have a rough idea of what the output I want and why it's useful. Let me explain that very clearly. Let me give it to 2, 3, 4, 5 AIs, let them go do the thing, read their work product, critique this, send it back to this one, get this other one to make some changes to it as well. So I that's what I think kind of the future of high performance work is going to look like. But
yeah. So as a dad of 4 kids, I got 4 boys. It worries me that I hope that critical thinking doesn't leave, right? Because it's oh, I've got this idea. I let it go one layer of the onion peel back, and then AI did the rest. Whereas you know, when we're growing up trying to make a name for ourselves in the business, you had to think on your own, right? And I know times are changing. Maybe I sound like the old dad now, but it's like I just worry about that they're going to be able to the next generation, you know, is going to be able to think deeply and drive and do the things we need them to do.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I don't think I have the answer. I mean, I don't know if anybody has the answer to these deep questions, but my hunch is that it's just going to exacerbate kind of like a person's personal tendencies. So I think hyper-skeptical people will continue to be hyper-skeptical and think critically, and they'll push the AI to, they'll be like, really? Is that really the answer? Or like, did you think about A, B, and C? And like myself, you know, I'm pretty skeptical about a lot of research. And what I've noticed is that if I read about a new finding in my field, and then I ask for a ChatGPT 4o, their base model about it, it'll generally give a pretty kind of like, almost like it's reading the press release sort of answer for that research. But then if I read that, I'm like, really? What I can then do is I can go to O3, which is like the thinking model.
Yes, can you explain those? I'm sorry, you'll finish that, but I want to talk about those in a minute. Finish your thought, though. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. So you have these different models, right? So you have like ChatGPT 4o, it's like their multimodal model. It's not a thinking model, it just kind of like spits out kind of the first thing that comes to mind. Whereas like the thinking models spend a lot more time kind of thinking about all the different possible answers and then like reasoning through each possibility. And then they oftentimes will do research on your behalf. So they'll like go to the internet, do some research, maybe read the paper that you're referencing. And so what I found is that with 4o, a lot of times you'll just get like basically like the New York Times kind of like, you know, kind of little type of summary where it's like, this is what the researcher said about their piece. Whereas with O3, the reasoning models, they'll often give me a much more in-depth kind of critical, like kind of view of that new piece of research. And I can read it and I can say, wait, but did they like, what was the methodology in that paper? How many people did they study? What was the p-value, right? Like, so I can ask these further questions, and I'm a pretty critically minded person. And what I found with AI is that AI has enabled me to be an even better critical thinker, because it can do the work I would have to do manually in the past that would take a long time. Now I can do in 2 minutes with AI's help. And so it's just enabled me to be a more critically minded, sophisticated consumer of information. So I think it's just exacerbating kind of like my pre-existing tendencies in that way. But I think that totally. But I think the reverse is also true. I think if you're not really critically minded, you never really had that, you're just going to ask ChatGPT and just read the first thing that you saw and be like, oh, okay, cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, that works.
So I think it's a multiplier. It's an exacerbator in any direction. I think these technologies they're just like rocket fuel for like your tendencies. Yeah.
It's amazing what they can learn, and it just remembers so much stuff and comes back and remembers who you are as a person. It's crazy. Robots. We're going to have robots sitting around our house in the next 5 years and cutting our grass and doing our laundry and making dinner.
It seems like it. I think, well, there already are those robo lawn. Have you seen those, the robo lawn care units? They're good. They seem really good. The robot vacuums are really good now.
I don't know if you're a golfer or not, but I was at a golf course in Paynes Valley in Branson, Missouri, Tigers play, and it's like super hilly. Yeah. I'm like, dude, who mows this? Well, we get to a tee box, and over off to the side, there was a hub where these like, you know, probably 3 foot, maybe 4 foot wide, you know, basically a 4 foot by 4 foot square. All these robots were coming in, they were docking right there, and they just go out. They just know where to go. They know where to go mow, and I'm like, this is insane.
That's so cool. I mean, I would love like a maid robot. That'd be amazing. I mean, that'd be amazing, right? Just like make the bed, tidy up, put everything away. I'd buy that in 2 seconds. So
yes. Yeah. Well, Elon Musk says they're going to do it through Tesla, I think. Aren't they? You're going to have like $10,000 or $20,000. You can get like this maid and this robot. And I'm like, man, I just hope nobody knows how to break into them and turn them bad like the movies. But so we talked about your book again, Real Change, Moving Beyond Habits to Achieve Lasting Transformation. Where do people find it? And what's your hope that their biggest takeaways from it?
Yes, you can find it on Amazon. You just type in Real Change or my name, Jason Hreha, Hreha. You can find it there. I wrote the book because I was just tired of I've done applied behavioral science work now for 15 years. I think I have as good of a sense of anyone in the world, like what works, what doesn't, how does behavior change actually happen? And I just kept reading these habit books, these popular habit books that come out. And I'm just like, they're just making this fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of habits. And really, everybody wants to start new practices, but then they're trying to inappropriately apply the science of habits to starting a practice. And so my whole hope with the book is that people stop making this kind of cognitive error when it comes to habits versus effortful actions, what I call practices. And I just want to give people a new approach, which is like, stop trying to spend all your time thinking about hacks or how can I like remind myself or tweak things a little bit in order to make this behavior more likely. Instead, zoom out, think about your goals, and spend all your time picking the right activity. And maybe you need to explore more activities. Instead of just saying, oh, I really want to start running. How do I get myself to run? Well, if you're struggling getting yourself to run, maybe that's the wrong behavior for you. You should actually just pick something else that will get you to that will help you achieve the same goals, but that you don't actually struggle with. And I really think that so much of life is really understanding yourself, understanding what you want, and then based upon your understanding of yourself and what you want, choosing the right games to play in the first place. And so that's my whole goal there.
Yeah, it's so true, right? I mean, I love playing basketball and pickleball and stuff like that, but like you, I hate running. Like my attention span is just not there. I'm bored by the time I'm like a half a mile in. I'm like, this sucks. I mean, I can do it, right? I just don't like it. But well, it's been awesome having you, Jason, and we'll put in the show notes Real Change on Amazon, where to buy the book. Love what you're doing. Love how you're impacting the world, man. So keep it up, and thanks for being on the Circuit of Success.
Yeah, thanks for having me.